Are UFOs God's chariots? Are UFOs actually God's chariots? Are those silvery colored machines that land on Earth from a more highly advanced extraterrestrial civilization actually angels in disguise? Could an extraterrestrial visitation on Earth solve all of our human problems and establish utopia? Hello, I'm Ted Peters, and in what follows we will work on answering just this set of questions. I grew up being fascinated with flying saucers already in middle school, and even though the names changed to UFOs and unidentified aerial phenomena and such things, I continue to be interested. Today I'm a professor and a researcher and a writer, and I specialize in the interaction of natural science and religion and culture. I would like in what follows to take a look at the modern phenomenon, and we'll treat it as a phenomenon, both looking at the object and the subject, both the perceived object and the subjectivity of the perceiver with the layers of interpretation, giving special attention to UFOs in the modern period from 1947 to the present, and I'll slice that in half, 1947 to 87 and 87 to the present. You will hear me use the term ETI myth. I am going to hypothesize that a myth of sorts, called the ETI myth, underlies the interpretive structure of both what ufologists do and what establishment scientists do. Yes, that stream of ufology that takes scientific integrity as important and pursues research on the UFO phenomenon from a scientific point of view. I find that very important and very valuable, but it shares an underlying myth with the establishment scientists, the astrobiologists, astronomers, and astrophysicists, etc. Now, ufologists don't invite astrobiologists to their barbecues and vice versa. I'd like to go to both barbecues, and they both talk about roughly the same thing, the ETI myth. I hope to make this clear as I try to make it clear just how the ETI myth underlies both ufology and astrobiology. Don't mistake me for offering a devastating critique. No, I genuinely appreciate the scientific strain within ufology, and I genuinely appreciate the work of astrobiologists, both in SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, as well as NASA and other places. They do wonderful science. No, by taking a look at the underlying ETI myth, I'm just trying to get better understanding of the relationship between science, religion, and our wider culture. Fasten your seatbelt. We're off to a herky-jerky up and down ride. Our subject matter goes by different names. Unidentified aerial phenomena, UFO, unidentified flying object, flying saucer. I use these terms almost interchangeably. Here's a recent sighting that Luis Elizondo has made public. This is a topic of worldwide interest and has been since at least 1947. I teach in Berkeley at the Graduate Theological Union, and along with my colleague Robert John Russell, a physicist, we edit this journal, Theology and Science. You can see the Golden Gate Bridge here under construction. We would like to finish the bridge so the traffic goes two directions, from science to theology and theology back to science. No, unidentified aerial phenomena is not one of our topics that we ordinarily study. I'm branching out on my own here. Astrobiologists and ufologists do not attend the same barbecues. At the Center for Theology and Natural Sciences, we spend a good deal of time with space scientists, astrophysicists, astrobiologists, and this book here is a compilation of chapters by scientists and theologians. We call it astrotheology. But the scientists who contribute here will have nothing to do with unidentified aerial phenomena. When I go to meetings of MUFON, there is quite a variety of people in the organization and in the audience, but there is a slice of the supporters of MUFON who think of themselves as being scientific, and many have doctor's degrees in one or another science. Whereas the astrobiologist is looking for life on a distant planet, the ufologist says that life has already visited us here. So you have people thinking scientifically in both groups. And I like to attend the barbecues of each group, but they don't socialize with one another. So in this presentation, we're going to put some people together who don't necessarily want to be together. Now, you may be asking why you should pay attention to a theologian commenting upon this subject matter. Here is Barry Downing writing in a recent MUFON UFO journal. There is a huge religious dimension to the UFO mystery, and those with a scientific leaning have to stop apologizing for it. The facts are there are religious issues raised by the ET presence. To deny this is to be unscientific. Suppose you have a white gauze bandage on your arm, and each time you look at it, it is more red than the previous time you looked at it. Even if the language is scientific, religion is bleeding through. In Berkeley, for the most part, we put natural scientists, theologians, philosophers, ethicists in a room and go at it, eyeball to eyeball, on common topics. We're concerned primarily about research science. But both science and religion are part of culture. If we're going to understand UFOs as a phenomenon, that is to say, both what is perceived and what is happening to the person perceiving it, then culture has to play a big role in our analysis. Hence my triangle: science, culture, theology. Let me provide an illustration of how culture needs to be factored in to UFO research. This picture is taken from 1976, I believe. At that time, I was the Louisiana State Director for MUFON. Yes, that's me in the red pants, interviewing Captain Pinky of the fire department. Two firemen out in a boat late at night on the bayou. This is outside of New Orleans, I don't know, 20, 30 miles. They're hunting nutria. Nutria are an animal kind of like a muskrat or a beaver that they hunt, kill, and eat. They have a outboard motor. And as they're trolling with shotguns on their laps looking for nutria to shoot, they notice a bright light in the sky. Oh, yeah, it's star sized to begin with, but it grows brighter and brighter as if the light is descending. And as it descends and becomes huge and bathes the boat in light, only 75 feet above them, the boat stops. Oh, yes, the engine is still churning water, but the boat is now stopped. It's not traveling anywhere. Both firemen feel paralyzed. They can still talk. They've got their shotguns on their laps and they talk about shooting it, but their bodies are paralyzed. They cannot move. And what is it? The hair on one of the firemen stands out. He told me, he says, I heard that your hair stands on end. I didn't know it would happen, but when I got home, my wife had to comb it down. So they discuss what this is, what's happening to them. They're frightened, but paralyzed. Eventually, the light shoots up into the sky and disappears. The boat starts moving again. Their bodies go back to normal, and they're extremely frightened. They go back home. Shortly after the incident, maybe a day or so, I come out to interview them. And as typical, I put down my tape recorder, blah, blah, blah. And the family's all around. What happened? We don't know. It was this bright light. Well, what do you think it was? I have no idea. It was just a bright light. And they laid out all the details. And what's so important here is that shortly after the incident, they did not have the vocabulary to explain what was going on, and everything was anomalous. 2 weeks later, I go back for another visit, and I think that's when this photo was taken by a camera crew. Things have changed. In the meantime, the wives of the two firemen have read multiple books on UFOs. And they've been talking every day. And now, when I interview them, well, what was this? Well, we've been visited by beings from outer space, and they come from a civilization much more advanced than we are. And Captain Pinky here reports a paranormal phenomenon that on this fire truck he saw a vision of his deceased mother. She's sitting on the fire truck talking with him. So in that 2-week period, the cultural tropes having to do with the UFO phenomenon have now so integrated themselves with the self-understanding of what happened that you cannot distinguish the so-called raw experience from the overlays of the cultural tropes, or what I'm going to call models or motifs. It's all of a single interpretive piece. And so I believe the UFO investigator needs to understand the important role that culture plays in the interpretation of the basic experience. There is one UFO phenomenon, I think, but it has many facets and dimensions. I'm particularly interested in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, even though I'm quite aware there are other angles on it. And within the extraterrestrial hypothesis, I ask, what is it that we Earthlings think about our visitors from outer space? And when I began researching the first edition of the book, UFOs, Gods, Chariots, in the 1970s, I saw three distinctly coherent but different models, and then I had to add one for the second edition, Model 4, in the 1980s and 90s had appeared. The first is the political model, the interstellar diplomat, where representatives of an off-Earth civilization are coming here because terrestrial politics are threatening the peace of the planet. They cannot get their act together to prevent international war. There is a lot of mix-up between what the visitor from space represents and terrestrial governments. The second model is the research scientist, just as our scientists go places to study things, so also aliens are coming to Earth to study us, especially our anatomies, as if what they learn they're going to take back to a university on an extraterrestrial planet. The third model is the spiritual model, the celestial savior model. According to this, at least one extraterrestrial civilization is more highly evolved than we are. When they visit us, they bring our own future back to us, and they can save us from self-destruction either through nuclear war or through planetary ecocide. Then Model 4, the hybridizer model that develops in the late 80s and 1990s, where the aliens are coming here to mix the genes of Earth and off-Earth peoples to create a hybrid. Fasten your seatbelt. We're going to visit each of these four models and try to understand that interaction between science, theology, and the wider culture. Well, how do you like my flying saucer? I made that as a teenager on the lathe in the basement with my dad's help. Yeah, those are ping pong balls in the landing gear there. Well, you can see this statue of Hermes on this slide, and Hermes was a messenger god, and so a whole academic discipline has arisen in his name called hermeneutics, the philosophy of interpretation. We're going to study how UFOs are interpreted. And the method will be that of phenomenology. And as I mentioned before, in phenomenology, we're concerned not just with the object that we perceive, but also with the subjectivity of the perceiver. So the experience that you or I or our good friends have with a flying saucer or an unidentified aerial phenomenon, that experience is layered with perception and interpretation. And sometimes it will even rise to the level of a myth or a symbol. Well, how does all of that go together? And that's what we're going to look at. Let's take a look at model number one, the interstellar diplomat. We're entering the field of exopolitics now, and the key feature is that of a government conspiracy. The modern chapter in the UFO story begins on June 24, 1947, when pilot Kenneth Arnold sees 9 discs near Mount Rainier in the state of Washington, and gives them the name Flying Saucer. 2 weeks later, near Roswell, New Mexico, we have the report of a crashed flying saucer, and 4 or 5 bodies of visitors from outer space. Eventually, those bodies end up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, and it's not clear. All 5 dead or just 4 dead and 1 living. There's the newspaper, Roswell Daily Record, announcing the UFO crash, and James Ramey, representing the U.S. military under orders from Vandenberg, telling the public it wasn't a flying saucer. No, it was a balloon. And thus begins the drama that continues down to the present day that says, do not trust the U.S. government. They lie to us because they won't divulge the truth. And the truth being that Earth is being visited by a civilization in outer space. In 1950, we find the beginning of a new genre of literature, the spate of flying saucer books. Here's one of the first by Donald Kehoe, and he starts right off complaining about the U.S. government withholding the facts. The paradigm for the interstellar diplomat model is set in 1951 with the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. Now, it's my judgment that there are only 2 authentic UFO movies. This is the first one, 1951. The second was Spielberg's 1977 Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Oh, yes, there are lots of movies about aliens coming to Earth from outer space, but the other ones belong in the science fiction genre. these two are authentic to the UFO experience. Now, if you may remember, the plot of The Day the Earth Stood Still, Klaatu comes to Earth from an extraterrestrial civilization, actually a federation of planets that live in peace. His flying saucer lands on the Mall in Washington, D.C. It's important to note that the flying saucer is round, it is metallic, it is so hard we can't even drill a hole in it with a diamond drill. You don't see any seams, and suddenly a door opens and then closes. My father was an automotive engineer, and his dream was to invent a door that fit so perfectly that when it closed, you couldn't see the seam anymore. Well, this flying saucer represented perfection in that engineering sense. Klaatu, the emissary from outer space, comes to Earth to meet with the heads of governments in order to prevent Earth from either destroying itself or putting an atomic bomb on a rocket and sending it to outer space and jeopardizing the safety of the extraterrestrials. But as you can imagine, the heads of state cannot cooperate. Politics on Earth is an utter failure. Nationalism, patriotism, and separatism and hostility dominate. So Klaatu has to find an international community to deliver his message. Who would provide that international community? The United Nations? Oh no, that's more politics. How about religious groups? No, he doesn't even think of that. No, he goes to the scientists. The scientists have an international, multi-ethnic, and multicultural community, right? And so in the climactic scene, Klaatu is giving a speech from his flying saucer to an audience of scientists, different races, men and women. There are some Sikhs there in their religious clothing, and he gives this speech about security. There must be security for all, or no one is secure. We live in peace, without arms or armies, free to pursue more profitable enterprises. And then he leaves Earthlings with the decision. Are you going to pursue peace or war? Then he gets back into his flying saucer and disappears into the sky. This is a fictional movie, but it's a movie with an impact because the UFO cults of the later 1950s repeat again and again virtually the same thing that we heard in Klaatu's fictional speech. George Adamski claims that he went out into a California desert and there he met a visitor from Venus with long flowing hair that reminds us of Jesus. He had kindness and compassion. And when Adamski asks him why he's come to Earth, the spaceling makes the shape of a mushroom cloud. and says, boom, boom. This highly technologically advanced alien from the planet Venus flies to Earth and says, boom, boom. Adamski's conclusion is that the interstellar diplomat is here, quote, to help us and perhaps protect us from ourselves. This diplomat is going to help us save ourselves from self-destruction. The Raelians, beginning in the 1970s down to the present time, at one point having at least 60,000 adherents centered in France, Switzerland, and French-speaking Canada. Like Adamski, it begins with a flying saucer landing and getting an education from the UFOnauts who are teaching us. What do the UFOnauts teach us, Earthlings? You urgently need to stop nuclear weapons testing. And if you become a threat to us, we will have to reduce you to silence. The now immortal words of Klaatu from 1951 echoing down the corridors of the decades. UFO researchers over the decades have wanted to engage government, get government to listen. So here is UN Secretary Kurt Waldheim at a meeting in 1978. Over here, this is J. Allen Hynek and Hynek's friend and colleague, Jacques Vallée. This is Sir Eric Gary, Prime Minister of Grenada. I actually met him. He had a UFO experience. Len Stringfield from Cincinnati, Ohio. Len had done a lot of research into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The U.S. government, the United States Air Force, the United Nations, the government of Britain, governments of Brazil, Russia, and Japan, all have played an important role in what has been the UFO conversation. Meet the fascinating Stephen Greer, who's writing the current chapter in the larger story of the interaction between UFO investigators and the U.S. government. He founded the Disclosure Project in 1993. He's indefatigable, a doctor and a UFO researcher from North Carolina. By disclosure, he means Uncle Sam should open the files and provide the public with knowledge of our relationship to extraterrestrial intelligence, and he believes that some of the communication between Earth and off-Earth societies is human initiated. Since Brigadier Colonel Ramey told us a lie in 1947 about the Roswell case, that it was a balloon instead of a crashed flying saucer, the U.S. government stubbornly has been withholding information and giving us false news. The Disclosure Project will finally get the truth. He says it's not an invasion, it's a cruise. The second in our series of models is that of the research scientist. Could extraterrestrial visitors look like scientists doing research, just as our earthling scientists go to off-Earth sites to do research? Note this sentence in Roger Marsh's report on the best reports of 2018. In most of the cases, it seems the object is on a surveillance mission, of some sort with little or no regard to the humans. Could the research scientist model be operative here in the structure of interpretation? "1973 was a flap year, that is to say, a large number of UFO sighting reports in a relatively short period of time. Perhaps the most publicized case of the year was that of the two Pascagoula fishermen, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. Hickson was a shipfitter and Parker a welder in the shipyards on the Pascagoula River. After work on Thursday, October 11, they went fishing. They caught two flathead catfish. And then a flying saucer type craft landed. Well, it didn't exactly land, it just hovered 3 feet above the ground. This is a rough picture that Charles Hickson drew for me in my office when I was talking with him. They were taken aboard the craft. The light was so bright it was difficult to see. Parker fainted. Hickson remained conscious throughout. Now, I'd like to read from my interview transcript, just a small section. So I asked Charlie, just what happened to you inside the craft? Hickson said, he had a southern drawl, well, they held me suspended in the air. I never touched the floor. Then something like an eye came right out of the wall toward me and stopped at my face. I asked, do you mean a living eye? Hickson answered, no, it must have been something mechanical. Maybe it was like an x-ray machine. I'm not sure. I asked, how large was it? Hickson answered, it was about this big. Hickson held out his hands, indicating it was about the size of a football. It was larger in the front and tapered back, sort of like a bicycle headlight. And the front was made of something different from the edges and back. It was not attached to anything I could see. It was just hanging there. So I asked, do you mean it had no connecting wires or cables? Hickson answered, no, none that I could see. Then I asked, well, what happened next? He said, well, it came right up to me and stopped. It slowly went down the front of my body as if it were taking pictures or something. I believe, but I'm not sure, it went under me and up my back and up over the top of my head. Anyway, soon I saw it come down and stop again in front of my face. Then it went back toward the wall and disappeared. So I asked, what do you think they were doing to you? And Hickson said, it was some sort of examination. Have the research scientists from another civilization come to Earth and they're studying the human body and maybe sending the data back home? Do we have here an interstellar traveler who fits the model of the research scientist. Calvin Parker's account of the abduction includes the examination by the alien research scientist, even though there's a slight difference in detail. Perhaps Charlie was standing up while Calvin was laid out on an examination table. Let's hear it in Calvin's own words.
Well, when we got to the door, this creature or this robot made a left turn, went down a hallways just a little ways, and then turned right. And I was able to see into the room. Now, I couldn't move my body or anything. All I could do was move my head. And I was able to look in the room, and there was like a glass table there. And this table was sitting kind of on an angle, like a 45-degree angle. And this creature, or what I call the big ugly one, carried me over, laid me on this table, and I was looking face up, and I couldn't move. I was just laying there. I could look up at the ceiling. And this is where Charlie and I's story kind of tunes in together. He called it a big eye, but to me it looked like a deck of cards that was hanging from the ceiling and come down and stopped about a foot and a half from her head. And this it was kind of bluish on the bottom. And then it started revolving around, and it would click as it revolved. Then it just shot back up into the ceiling. Now, this is where we differ a little bit. And to be honest, I never talked to Charlie about what happened to him or read his book, really didn't care. All I wanted to do was forget this and get it behind me.
Perhaps the paradigmatic abduction case in the first period of the modern UFO phenomenon, say 1947 to 1987, is the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case, September 19, 1961. Mr. and Mrs. Hill are driving south on U.S. Highway 3 from the Canadian border toward their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It's the middle of the night. A flying saucer-like craft appears ahead of them and off to the side, and they stop the car. They approach with curiosity, and through a window, they think they see humanoid creatures looking back at them. They get back into the car after this wondrous experience and drive on. When they check their watches, time was missing. Where did that time go? After they get home, they experience nightmares and nervousness and the kinds of things that are troubling. Eventually, they make their way to the office of Dr. Benjamin Simon, a psychiatrist in Boston. Dr. Simon puts each of them under hypnotic regression, and they tell a story that in the missing time they were abducted. Their memories had been frozen, but under hypnotic regression, what they had forgotten was retrieved. They were both taken aboard the craft. They were separated. Betty's memory is a bit more specific than Barney's. She remembers having her clothes removed. There was nothing sexual about this. Laid down on the table, there was a physical examination of her anatomy. Some kind of needle was pressed through her navel, and she thinks it might have been a pregnancy test. That's the analogy that she could think of, but it was definitely in her mind a medical examination, a scientific examination of a Earth woman's body. In a conversation she has with the pilot, he shows her a star map. She later redraws the star map, and Marjorie Fish at Ohio State and Stanton Friedman later identify it as a planet orbiting Zeta 2 Reticuli, 29 light years away or something like that. From outer space, the research scientist comes to study the human body. Did Benjamin Simon believe literally, factually, that everything that was said was true? No, he had a little skepticism, and he used the term folie à deux to describe the case. Folie à deux, French, for a shared delusion, a shared dream. This led in the field of psychiatry to a wider use of the term folie à deux to refer to a shared delusion uncovered through hypnotic regression. Barney passed away some years ago. Betty lived on and became a celebrity in UFO circles. There have been other abductions in this earlier period that look a lot like the Betty and Barney Hill experience. Meet Terry Lovelace, June 1977. Terry and his friend Toby, both medical technicians in the U.S. Air Force, are camping on a plateau at Devil's Den Park in Arkansas. Nighttime. They encounter a very large triangular shaped craft with lights on each of the three corners. It settles down to only 300 feet above their campsite. From a light source, a beam of light comes down and emits what look like the grays, the spacelings that have become common knowledge by 1977, and which appear again in Steven Spielberg's movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind in December 1977, just to place it on the calendar. Through hypnotic regression, enhanced by sodium amythol, Terry says could have been sodium pentothal, truth serum. Terry retrieves, in this state of hypnotic regression, the details of what happens aboard the ship after they are abducted. Terry is standing with all of his clothes in his hands. He's buck naked. He feels paralyzed, yet he's moving. He's laid down on a medical examination table by the Greys, and then he's approached by an insectoid, much taller, whom he imagines wearing a white coat symbolizing medical science. Terry tries to scream, which he fears annoys the insectoid doctor, who then thumps him on the head and says telepathically, "Mr. Lovelace, don't worry, we're not going to hurt you." This research scientist model has something in common with the classic Betty and Barney Hill case of 1962 and the Charles Hickson Calvin Parker Pascagoula, Mississippi case of just a half decade earlier. We have the examination table, the apparent medical scientist doing research, the sense of paralysis, yet observing what is happening. And what we have in common between Terry Lovelace and the Betty and Barney Hill case is that details of what happens aboard the craft are obtained through hypnotic regression. Remember, in the case of Charles Hickson and Pascagoula, there was no hypnotic regression, yet the image of the research scientist doing a medical examination is in continuity. I want to accept without cynicism or skepticism that this is what Mr. Lovelace actually believes happened to him. I have a little bit of doubt regarding how trustworthy hypnotic regression is, because under hypnotic regression, especially enhanced by a chemical, I wonder, could there be a merging of the dream state with realism? Could there be? I don't know for certain, but could there be a merging of the archetypes, to use Carl Jung's vocabulary, with the interpretation of what's actually happening on the other, and they provide a single narrative? That's my speculation. Can I prove it? No. I simply want to accept the testimony of these abductees and look for the common structures. And in this case, it fits Model 2, the research scientists coming from outer space to Earth to do investigation on human physiology. In 2012, the photographer Stephen Hirsch asked UFO convention attendees who claimed to have had a personal contact with extraterrestrials to draw and describe their experiences. Take a look at this drawing. The alien is called what? A doctor? Camille says a beam of solid blue light came through her ceiling and transported her where? Onto a table, where she was surrounded by beings in white robes with high collars. Does it look like the research scientist is doing an anatomical examination? On the one hand, according to Model 2, the visitor from outer space looks like a scientist, especially a medical scientist, visiting Earth to do surveillance or anatomical research to take back to an extraterrestrial medical school. On the other hand, we on Earth who study this, we celebrate. We try to inculcate the objective research values of the scientist. Here's Walter Andrus, international director of MUFON for many years, himself not a scientist, but he loved bringing scientists and theologians and scholars from other disciplines into the research-oriented mission of MUFON. The model of the research scientist applies simultaneously both to the visitors from outer space and also to our own self-understanding as we engage in researching UFOs. Let's take a look carefully at the Mutual UFO Network and its set of goals. Number one, to investigate UFO sightings and collect the data in the MUFON database for use by researchers worldwide. Number 2, promote research on UFOs to discover the true nature of the phenomenon with an eye towards scientific breakthroughs. Note the scientific mindset and improving life on our planet. That's the ethic of beneficence. Number 3, educate the public on the UFO phenomenon and its potential impact on society. So MUFON is a service organization oriented toward a scientific understanding of the phenomenon in service of the welfare of our planet. This is BUFORA, the British UFO Research Association. Note BUFORA's self-understanding, a non-cultist and scientifically evaluative organization. My all-time favorite flying saucer photo, right here, McMinnville, Oregon, May 11, 1950. Farmer Paul Trent takes this photo of what he described to be a 30-foot in diameter silver flying saucer. He actually took 2 photos separated by 30 feet or more so that an analyst could make triangulation work. Critics who have examined this photo subsequently all agree it's authentic. There's no string there, there's no photoshopping. Even the Condon report of 1969 claimed that this is an authentic photo, and people in McMinnville, Oregon, down to the present day, remember the Paul Trent photo each May. They celebrate the day that the flying saucer came to visit their hometown. I have been suggesting that there is a stream within ufology that thinks of itself as scientific. It's a dominant stream. Oh, yes, there are other streams flowing, paranormal experiences and connections with mysticism and things like that, but let's just keep our attention on the scientific stream. Is ufology a science? And if it is, why do astronomers and astrobiologists stay away from the ufologists? Let's go to the Condon report. After a flap of UFO sightings in Michigan, then Congressman Gerald Ford, who later would become U.S. President, Ford asked Congress to fund a government-sponsored study of the UFO phenomenon, and it was contracted to the University of Colorado under the leadership of chemist Edward Condon. So now, establishment scientists were getting paid to study flying saucers, and they wanted a team of reputable scientists. How would they get them, especially if scientists want to stay away from flying saucers, etc.? Well, as Condon was recruiting his researchers and a speech, he made this remark to his scientific colleagues. Our general conclusion is that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge. In other words, he has not yet begun the study, but he's already come to the conclusion that there's nothing scientific in it. He makes an assumption there's nothing scientific. He has yet to study it. There was a memo circulating around called the Low Memo. Our study should be conducted almost exclusively by non-believers. Wait a minute. Science has got nothing to do with belief. So a believer must be somebody who believes in UFOs, not who studies UFOs. Our study should be conducted almost exclusively by non-believers. The trick would be, I think, to describe the project so that to the public it would appear to be a totally objective study, but to the scientific community would present the image of a group of non-believers trying their best to be objective, but having an almost zero expectation of finding a saucer. Now, think about this. A scientific research program ought not to assume the conclusion before the research is followed. It looks like we have a conclusion before any research has begun here. Did the Condon report get any criticism? Well, you betcha it did. J. Allen Harnick, astronomer at Ohio State, Northwestern University, consultant to Project Blue Book for the U.S. Air Force. From the early 1950s through the end of the 1960s, his job was to debunk claims of experiences with flying saucers. In real life, Allen smoked a pipe when actors, play him on television. Where's the pipe? His criticism of the Condon report: the scientists were not scientific enough. True scientists would wait, draw their conclusion after they've evaluated the evidence, but the Condon scientists drew their conclusion before they examined the evidence. In fact, even though the Condon report debunks the UFO phenomenon, if you take a look at the actual examined reports, which include the McMinnville flying saucer photo, the evidence shows authenticity. So the conclusion doesn't even match the evidence. In short, the anti-UFO scientists are not scientific enough, says J. Allen Hynek. The problem of hermeneutics. Be prepared to encounter cultural references that we're just not going to get. We have just looked at two models, the interstellar diplomat and the research scientist. These are models or tropes or motifs that provide us with a kind of image of what to expect from an interstellar traveler who visits Earth. Now we're going to take a look at a third model, the celestial savior. This model presupposes that on Earth, science is our savior, or science plus technology is our savior. And with the UFO, we're getting extraterrestrial science and technology, more advanced than ours. Therefore, celestial technology is able to overcome humanity's greatest problems. I distinguish between abductees and contactees. Betty and Barney Hill and Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were abductees. They were abducted by UFOnauts visiting our planet, and they were abducted against their will. The contactee is different. The contactee is a willing communicator with extraterrestrials. In fact, the contactee wants to teach something to the human race learned from the UFOnauts. George Adamski in the 1950s, Rael in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s are contactees. Here's another one, Daniel Fry of the 1950s. He teaches us what was taught to him, that the space aliens are not here to assist any nation to make war, but to stimulate a degree of progress in which will eliminate the reasons for wars on Earth. Oh, yes, this fits the first model, the interstellar diplomat, but more than that, it brings salvation because human nature will be transformed. We will no longer be sinful. We will eliminate the reasons for war on Earth. The contactee celebrates the arrival of the celestial Savior. Refill your cup of coffee and relax. I want to tell you the story of Dick Jackson, an abductee, October 1975, Fort Myers, Florida. I interviewed Mr. Jackson. He says that he was awakened late at night, maybe 2 in the morning, and in his backyard he confronted a hovering flying saucer. Actually, it landed, and a humanoid creature was standing in the doorway, motioning for him to come in. He climbed 3 steps. "Do not be alarmed. No harm will come to you. I just want to talk to you," said the visitor from outer space. And Mr. Jackson said that he spoke perfect English. So I said, "What do you mean perfect English?" Well, he didn't use contractions such as ain't. When Mr. Jackson walked through the door of the craft, he noticed that he did not have to bend to fit. "I'm 6 foot 4.5 inches," he said to me. "I know a doorway is tall when I don't have to risk bumping my head." As Jackson entered the craft, he felt as though a suction action were at work over his body. He told a Fort Myers newspaper reporter, "I had the feeling that I was being vacuum cleaned, sterilized, I guess. Hell, I'm probably pretty well sterilized anyway. I'm at the age when you're sterilized." How old is that? Oh, 55. Well, inside the Starcraft, Jackson saw 2 space travelers, and though they spoke with each other in a foreign language, only one spoke to Mr. Jackson in English. Mr. Jackson said he was familiar with Spanish and French, but it wasn't either one of those. Well, Jackson kept stressing to me that these humanoids were not monsters and not little green men. Said they looked basically like the Caucasians we know on Earth, although slightly darker complexion, like an Italian. Jackson said that one man said he was a lot older than he looked. He looked to be 65, but he was much, much older. Jackson estimated the space visitors at 5 foot 2 inches. The inside of the cabin was about 24 feet in diameter, very plain. There was a control panel on the wall to the left. There was no furniture except a desk or a table, behind which sat the host, who Jackson had beckoned Jackson to come in earlier. The second occupant stood to Jackson's right, and as Jackson entered, he opened and closed a panel in the wall, revealing some wires. The panel was part of a cove or a rib that circumscribed the craft, and Jackson, noticing that the wire was in the form of field winding. Field winding is that curled wire you find inside an electric motor. Jackson speculated that maybe the whole ship served as an armature. So Jackson's first question to the space visitors was, how does the ship operate? The host responded, well, the best I can describe it to you is this. This is a generator and battery sitting on top of an electric motor. Well, Jackson, as it turned out, the interview was the mechanical type, and so his first question was a mechanical question. Well, where did the space visitors come from? They came from a place called Planta, Plantheh, and they spelled it in English. They described their home planet as so far more highly evolved and more technologically advanced than Earth that Earth would appear backward in comparison. So the Spacelings invited Jackson to recruit some Earthlings, and all would go to a new planet that they were currently populating. And this planet would be a wonderful place. Everybody's mental attitude would be different. There would be no need for money as we know it because everything would be shared. No work would be required, but if somebody felt like they needed meaningful work, they could have work. Nobody will ever get bored. The spacemen were talking with Jackson and using Jackson's name even though they had not been introduced. Then they made Jackson an offer. Would you please be a recruiter that would encourage this colonization effort? Well, Jackson said, I'd really like to, but you see, I can't do it because I've got a terminal illness. Well, he's got a whole bunch of them: arthritis, emphysema, myocarditis. So the recruiter or the spaceman said to Jackson that if you would be a recruiter, you know what? We would ask our doctors to cure you of all those diseases. Let me think about it, said Jackson. He went back home, went to sleep, and as he was departing the craft, it flew away. What is going on here? I asked Jackson if he were a religious man. Oh, no, he says, I'm not religious. I can't believe in God like other people do. I said, well, how do other people believe in God? Well, they think God's an old man with a white beard. I said, really? That sounds like Santa Claus. It doesn't sound like any God that I've ever heard of. Zeus, maybe, but certainly not the God of the monotheistic traditions. Wow. Field winding. Scientifically and technologically advanced. More highly evolved. This planet that Earthlings would travel to via the spacecraft sounded like, I asked Mr. Jackson, what's that place sound like? He says, paradise. I said, I don't think there's any mistake. They're taking you to paradise and you won't need money because everybody will share. Oh, yeah. All these selfish earthlings will suddenly share with one another. What about that walk through the door and feeling vacuum cleaned? Did that be a rite of purification, the equivalent of baptism for a Christian? It seems to me that there were plenty of religious themes at work here, covert, disguised, but profoundly religious, and articulated by an individual who thinks that he is not religious. Now, you might be asking, well, did it really happen? That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, how do we earthlings interpret our perception and our understanding of visitors from space? That's a phenomenological question. We'll leave the reality question to somebody else. UFOs twang our spiritual strings. Those spiritual strings vibrate with what I call sensibilities. They're not doctrines. No, they're sensibilities, regardless of what language we use. And what happens, I think, in the UFO phenomenon to some extent is that buried religious and spiritual sensibilities come to expression in disguised form. Here are four of them. Transcendence. Space is the physical prompter that elicits in you and me our sense of transcendence. We think of space as being infinite. It's not, but it's a way in which infinity presses its way into your and my consciousness. So the flying saucer starts as a pinprick light in space and gets bigger and brighter until it lands, and then it turns around and flies away and disappears among the stars. Transcendence is coming to visit us in the flying saucer of the UFO. Omniscience. The two visitors from space knew Dick Jackson's name even though he had not told them. How did they know that? Or they're more highly evolved and more technologically accomplished. Their quantity of technological knowledge is so much greater than what we have on Earth that Earth looks primitive in comparison. Omniscience. Perfection. Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, would say, well, the round, glowing shape and the light emitted from the saucer, those are subliminal symbols of perfection. The space visitor spoke perfect English, says Dick Jackson. Why was the concept of perfection even on his mind? Redemption. Earthlings, when they go to this new planet, will give up their selfish desires and share everything. Dick Jackson has 3 diseases, and the medical doctors from outer space will cure him of his diseases and he will live. Well, how long? Well, the 65-year-old UFOnaut is much older. Will Dick Jackson be given indefinite life, everlasting life? These are our spiritual strings that get twanged when visitors from outer space reveal themselves to us. Temple City, artist Douglas Taylor. The visiting UFOnauts and their flying saucer bring with them utopia, the New Jerusalem of the Book of Revelation. If you may remember the climactic scene in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, December 1977, you have this mesa, Devil's Tower, leading from the ground up. In the phenomenology of archaic religion, our ancestors built towers like the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, or ziggurats in ancient Babylonia, or pyramids in ancient Egypt, where the ground touches the sky, the axis mundi, the point where heaven and earth connect. So here on this mountaintop, descending from the heaven, is this glorious calliope of lights and music, and the very innocent and delicate spacelings who emerge, expressing warmth and love and care right along with unfathomable technological development. When Spielberg began planning this movie, he said, I was going to do a science fiction extravaganza, but then when I studied the UFO phenomenon, I realized it is a religious phenomenon. And so this is a religious movie because from space, the UFOnauts bring Earth its salvation. Now let me introduce the word myth. In the ancient world, the archaic world, the myth was a story about how the gods created the world in the beginning that explains why things are the way they are in the present. It was a story. In our case today, the myth is an underlying conceptual structure. And the particular myth we're going to talk about, the ETI myth, underlies all of our models. But it is especially vivid in the third model, the celestial savior. Here are the components of this conceptual myth: that life originates on a planet, Earth and other planets, and that leads then to the evolution of life. And secondly, evolution is progressive. Now remember, evolutionary biologists do not necessarily believe that evolution is progressive, but in this myth, it is assumed that there is progress in evolution so that simple life leads to complex life leads to intelligence leads to science and technology lead to utopia. So science is the savior, according to the ETI myth. And further, there is a Gnostic component to this. That is to say, the human problem is one of ignorance, not sin. The human problem is one of ignorance, and we can cure ignorance with more knowledge. So to be more highly evolved than another planet is to have more knowledge, and that increased knowledge will cure the human predicament here on Earth. Science is savior, and if science on Earth fails to save the human race, then maybe extraterrestrial science can do the job. Now, here is what is fascinating about the ETI myth. It is shared both in the UFO community and in the astrobiological community. Oh no, our science friends won't admit it, but it's a common belief structure underlying the more articulated things that either ufologists say or astrobiologists say. Now, let me just repeat with a diagram what I have just described as a component to the ETI myth, namely that evolution is progressive. There's no empirical evidence for this beyond the retrieval of evolutionary history here on Earth, yet it is a fastly held belief both among ufologists and many of our scientists. It begins with abiogenesis, the origin of life. Now, it's important to remember that the origin of life is not part of the theory of evolution. Charles Darwin says at least 4 times in his book of 1859. He has no idea how life originated. He only shows how species change over time, and even down to the present time. We don't really have a single widely accepted theory about how non-biotic chemistry became biotic chemistry. According to the ETI myth, simple life forms advanced in complexity. Complex life forms led eventually to intelligence, and in the case of the human race, more highly evolved intelligence led to science and technology, and so on these off-Earth planets where life has evolved for a longer period of time, there is increased science and increased technology and increased intelligence, so that science and technology has led to peace, virtue, even utopia. And when the UFOnauts come to Earth from this extraterrestrial, more highly advanced civilization, they bring what we need to know to create utopia here on Earth. Science coming to Earth from the heavens provides salvation for Earth. The underlying ETI myth in the celestial savior model for interpreting the extraterrestrial hypothesis. As I said earlier, in the pre-modern era, a myth was a story about what happened in the past. In the ancient world, a myth was a story about how the gods created the world in the beginning that explains why things are the way they are today. In the modern era, we get a myth that is now historical, temporal in character, in which we're on the brink now of a new age. It's a 3-part theory of history in which there was an original goodness, a fall into messiness, and now through science and technology, we're on the brink of redemption. and the arrival of a new age. As I said earlier, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution through variation in inheritance, acted on by survival of the fittest, described species change as an accident without purpose. On the other hand, there are times in which Darwin subjects his theory of evolution to the doctrine of progress, and this becomes very handy in the late 19th century to support racial superiority. We can now, with Darwin's theory, measure the various races on planet Earth according to relative intelligence, rank the races, and then mark which races are likely to take us into the new age. We call the less highly evolved races savages, and the more highly evolved races are who? Those we find in Europe. And the most highly evolved race of all are the white people who live in Great Britain. Here's a principle. According to the three-era structure of the New Age myth, a Garden of Eden, a fall, and then a return to the Garden of Eden, the person telling the myth celebrates himself or herself as the savior. Now let me repeat a distinction I made earlier because I think it continues to be important, and that is the distinction between the contactee and the abductee. The contactee gives voice to what we saw in sophisticated form in Charles Darwin and the tripartite theory of history in the New Age myth. Contactees are not necessarily sophisticated like scientists, but they still give voice to the same underlying ETI myth. What is explicit is the utopianism. We are on the brink of a utopia coming to us from the sky. Contactees voluntarily communicate with the extraterrestrials. In many cases, as I've said, they've been directly influenced by the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. Contactees do not look like what we find in science fiction. The abductee, in contrast, involuntarily, though temporarily, become captives of the aliens. The utopianism is hidden, hidden beneath symbols. Abductees can be influenced by UFO literature, to be sure. They are not influenced by science fiction. As I mentioned earlier, I think those who understand the UFO phenomenon authentically can distinguish it clearly from the genre of science fiction. Now let's take a look at the contactee and UFO religion. On March 26, 1997, the world woke up to the shocking news that 39 people had committed mass suicide in a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe. What could possibly explain a tragedy of this proportion? Well, what was immediately revealed is that These 39 individuals belong to a group. I would use the word cult. My colleagues would call it a new religious movement. This new religious movement called Heaven's Gate was led by two Pied Pipers, Marshall Herff Applewhite and Bonnie Truesdale Nettles, and they had given themselves nicknames over the years. The two, him and her, he and she, Bo and Peep, and at the time of the suicide, they were Do and Ti, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. The theology of Applewhite and Nettles. Fascinating. They said that the human race on Earth had been seeded at its beginning by an extraterrestrial civilization more highly evolved than Earth was at the time and still is. They are referred to as having attained the next evolutionary level. Note the assumption of evolution. They had attained what Applewhite and Nettles called a level above the human. And we here on Earth had certainly evolved since our beginning, but we need to ready ourselves for the next level. And in order to get to the next level, we would have to shed our terrestrial bodies, become disembodied for a period, then become reincarnated, and then fly aboard a UFO to the kingdom of heaven, which exists literally somewhere in the physical heavens. The UFO would carry a reincarnated human being physically to the kingdom of heaven. Suicide was the means of getting into the disembodied state, and our disembodied souls would be carried to a comet called the Hale-Bopp Comet. And from there, the flight to the kingdom of heaven in outer space would be launched. How did this theology develop? When I was doing research for the first edition of the book, UFOs, God's Chariots, I made contact with Applewhite and Nettles some 25 years before the mass suicide. And they were gathering recruits up and down the West Coast, offering people HIM, human individual metamorphosis. They claimed to be the reincarnation of the two, who themselves were representative of Jesus Christ, and the figure of the two comes from Revelation chapter 11. I actually had Applewhite and Nettles communicate with me as I queried them. Let me read to you a memo they sent me. Christ stated that he was flesh and bone, not spirit, in Luke 24. It is necessary to enter the kingdom of heaven with a physical body, one that has been transformed as the body of Christ had been transformed. His transformation was completed at the transfiguration. Our bodies must likewise be changed. We too must overcome the world and leave this planet in a cloud of light, or a UFO, if we would enter the kingdom of heaven. This is not to say that ones who died in the past have been lost, for they have not. It is to say that the time is now if you wish to go. Heaven's Gate, disembodiment, re-embodiment, and everlasting life at a higher stage of evolution, somewhere on a physical planet elsewhere in outer space. This is the cover of Time magazine when Roswell, New Mexico was celebrating the 50th anniversary of the UFO crash at Roswell, 1947. How do you like this phrase? Homo alterius specialis. The next level of evolution of the human race on Earth will be that already attained on another planet somewhere else in our universe. This is actually a t-shirt I bought for myself at the Roswell celebration in 1997. Meet Barry Downing. Barry is a Presbyterian pastor with a doctorate in theology. Barry studied the work of Rudolf Bultmann, a New Testament scholar in the first half of the 20th century, who gave us the term demythologizing. Bultmann had recognized the mythological elements in the worldview of the New Testament, and Bultmann argued that the theologian needs to demythologize the mythical structures in order to interpret Jesus and get the religious truth, get the existential meaning buried within the myth. What Barry does in this fascinating book in the late 1960s is take the method of demythologizing, apply it to the worldview inherent in the Bible, and then substitute flying saucers for angels and other divine activity. So when it comes to the ascension of Jesus post-resurrection, where Jesus ascends, departing his disciples, Jesus ascends upward on a cloud, Barry says. Could he have ascended by taking a ride on a flying saucer? So there's a reinterpretation of biblical passages in which an advanced technology from an extraterrestrial civilization takes the place of angels and other supernatural forces. Catch the date, just before 1970. Whom could he have inspired? Could he have inspired Eric von Däniken? Could he have inspired the ancient astronaut theorists? Could Barry have been far more influential than even he realizes? I have genuinely enjoyed my friendship with Barry Downing, seeing him on and off at MUFON meetings over the years. Let me just offer a theologian's comment about his approach in that book. I differ on what demythologizing means. In the case of Rudolf Bultmann, who gave us the term demythologizing, Bultmann wanted us to recognize a myth as a myth and to recognize that buried within the myth is a transcendental sensitivity, an awareness of God beyond the myth. In other words, we don't literally accept the myth as true, but rather through the myth we have access to God revealing God's self in the story or in the worldview. What Berry does is simply translate the myth into technological re-mythologizing, so to speak. Now, personally and theologically, Barry truly understands that demythologizing is an interpretation of the myth and not a re-mythologizing task. However, many of those who come later in the 1970s, right on down to the present time, have re-mythologized the scripture as well as the literature of other ancient civilizations and created a new myth that is technologized, scientized and technologized, so that the supernatural dimensions of the ancient worldview are lost and replaced with strictly natural uh, dimensions and interpretations. The scientizing and technologizing of ancient myths, symbols, legends, worldviews became a worldwide fascination. I think the year was 1973 with Eric von Daniken's book, The Chariots of the Gods. I think within 5 years it sold 37 million copies. He had television shows and movies. What excitement. And today you can see the legacy of von Daniken in the Ancient Alien television series. And the basic theme here is to look at religious literature or monuments of archaic society and reinterpret them as the products of an encounter between less highly evolved earthlings and more highly evolved and technologically advanced spacelings, ancient astronauts who come to Earth and influence the direction of human civilization. By appeal to an extraterrestrial technological explanation, ancient astronaut theorists believe they explain archaic religion better than theologians can, or better than religious scholars can, or better than archaeologists can. The instructions on how to build a pyramid are written inside the pyramids by the architects. We know the stones were moved by slaves. Did the technological whizzes from outer space use slave labor as well? My own survey research demonstrates that adherents to most religious traditions, including various brands of Christianity, find the extraterrestrial hypothesis quite compatible with their religious beliefs, whether the extraterrestrial hypothesis comes from science or from ufology. There are some conservative Christian groups that ascribe UFOs, flying saucers, reports of outer space visitors to Satan, to demonic tricks. Why? The invisible link is evolution. Because of the underlying ETI myth and the belief that aliens are more highly evolved than Earthlings, Satan's trick is, if we believe in the extraterrestrial hypothesis to explain UFOs, then we will be tricked into believing in evolution. Go figure. Pope Francis is not worried about demonic tricks. Evolutionary biology is an acceptable science to His Holiness. If an alien were to land in a UFO and step out and ask for baptism, Pope Francis would be ready to oblige. We've just looked at three models: the extraterrestrial as the interstellar diplomat, the extraterrestrial as the scientific researcher, and the extraterrestrial as a celestial savior. I think I did a fairly good job of identifying and analyzing these three models when preparing the first edition of my book, UFOs, God's Chariots, back in the 1970s. But in the late 1980s, things changed. And that has led to Model 4, the extraterrestrial as the hybridizer. The abductee phenomenon seemed to be pretty stable for the first 40 years of the modern UFO phenomenon. But in the late 1980s, the abductee phenomenon changed. Whitley Strieber, Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, John Mack were meeting regularly in New York City. And the model of the abductee began to look a little bit more negative, even sinister. And it even seemed to contradict my celestial savior model. All this leads, these reports of abductions, all this leads to the unwelcome speculative inference that hybrids of some sort are being produced by a technology superior to ours, says Bud Hopkins in his book, The Intruders. Abductees are not believers in some religion of outer space. They are not seeking publicity or other rewards, and they are at heart confused and frightened. So, when I confronted the hybridizer, I wondered, could I have been mistaken in what I had thought was the case for the contactees and abductees up until 1987 or so? Meet John Mack. I've not met anyone who knew John who didn't admire or like him. I knew John, and my gosh, I thought he was a fine person. Unfortunately, he was an American crossing the street in Great Britain, looked the wrong way, and was run over and killed. John was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and took seriously the accounts of individuals who had UFO abduction experiences. His examination of their accounts included hypnotic aggression, which, remember, we found in the Betty and Barney Hill case back in the early 1960s. And in his blockbuster book, Abduction, where he had maybe a dozen and a half case studies, he found a common structure that these individuals had, number one, experienced multiple abductions, taken from their sleep at home aboard a craft, frequently over time, beginning when they were children. Number two, they ascended right through the roof of their house into a hovering spacecraft. Number three, aboard the craft, they had interactions with the Greys, those cute little guys and gals that we saw in Close Encounters of the Third Kind and often reported in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Sometimes they encountered insectoids or reptilians aboard the craft. Number four, there was some physical probing of their body by the Greys, and that looks a little bit like what happened to Betty Hill or even Charles Hickson. But now here's what is new. Number five, women were abducted, have an egg removed, or a man, sperm removed. Number six, some reports of involuntary sexual intercourse. And number seven, and here is the whopper, the birth of a hybrid baby. And sometimes the mother of that hybrid baby is abducted again so she can develop a relationship with the baby that is an incarnation of heaven on earth. Well, not exactly on earth, but in a spaceship in orbit. Number eight. After the harrowing experience of multiple abductions, having your body probed, giving birth to a hybrid baby, the individual develops a new and deeper appreciation for the sacredness of the natural realm. Whoa, when I read Abduction, I kind of got upset. I said, boy, this just doesn't look like what I have discovered. And so I contacted John and said, I really would like to have a serious meeting about what it is that you report in this book. And so he set it up that we would meet at Peer. That was his small research organization there in Boston. And he invited Harvey Cox, a theologian from the Divinity School at Harvard, to join us. And after the introductions, he said, now, Dr. Peters, what is your problem? And so I said, in my research of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, overwhelmingly what abductees experience, let alone contactees, is positive, not negative. Well, this led to a lengthy interchange, and he listened really very carefully to my arguments. I listened to his, and we developed a really good dialogue, and he said that, Dr. Peters, I should tell you that after the book Abduction was published, and I have an ongoing relationship with many of these abductees, over time, their interpretation of their harrowing experience mellows and they become more positive. And in fact, they even begin to express spiritual significance to their abduction. And later on, when he wrote his book, Passport to the Cosmos, you see the emergence of a more positive spiritual interpretation of what initially was quite negative and terrifying. The religious or spiritual dimension of the original abduction experiences was not lost on John anyway. Here in Abduction, he writes that the UFO abduction experience bears resemblance to other dramatic transformative experiences undergone by shamans. Shamans connect heaven and earth. By shamans, mystics, and ordinary citizens who have had encounters with the paranormal. Then in Passport to the Cosmos, over time, they may have come to see the Greys as spirit guides, odd spirit guides, closer to the ultimate creative principle. I mean, that's going to be his appellation for the divine or Brahman, closer to the ultimate creative principle or source than humans, even as emissaries from the divine. So my point is that despite the strong negativity of the hybridizer model initially, there is gradually some convergence in the direction of the celestial savior model. Wasn't this blue back in 1947? The UFOnauts say to one another. Notice the smile on the face of the moon. In that first 40-year phase, 1947 to 1987 or so, the message from our visitors from outer space addressed to those of us on Earth was stop testing nuclear weapons and make peace in order to prevent self-destruction by thermonuclear war. In the present phase, the contactees and, in many cases, the abductees report a slightly different message. Now the threat is not nuclear weapons, rather it is ecocide, that unless the human race repents from its orgy of consumption and pollution, we will self-destruct. So isn't it nice that the message of salvation is tailor-made to the problem we have here on Earth? John Mack thought he perceived in the testimonies of his abductees this sense of moral and spiritual ecological responsibility. Now let me address the question, why is it that when John Mack and I first encountered one another, I was bringing with me a bushel basket full of UFO experiences that were very positive, that were almost looking forward to salvation descending from the skies. And John Mack was bringing his bushel basket of abductees who had such a negative, traumatizing experience that included personal violation, sexual violation, that had to be retrieved through hypnotic regression. What accounts for that big difference? Something changed in the first half of the decade of the 1980s. What was that change? I have a theory. Fasten your seatbelt now as I share with you my theory. Recall that in 1962, Benjamin Simon, the psychiatrist, had employed hypnotic regression in order to retrieve the forgotten memories of Betty and Barney Hill. That method of retrieval of forgotten memories through hypnotic regression became known. And somewhere around 1979, 1980, the paperback version of the book Michelle Remembers was published, and Lawrence Pasder, the author, and the protagonist in the book, Michelle Smith, went on a book promotion tour. And according to this psychiatrist writing an account of a little girl growing up in a satanic cult in which she was ritually abused and sexually abused, and the abuse was discovered under hypnotic regression. Well, the method of hypnotic regression to retrieve forgotten memories of sexual abuse and satanic ritual abuse caught on fire during the first half of the 1980s. The nation was rocked with court case after court case in which young women would report forgotten memories of sexual abuse from their fathers when they were children. And we had a number of preschools in which the directors were sent to court, arrested, and tried for satanic ritual abuse against the children, sexual abuse against the children. And that went on until 1987 or more, and overlaps with the beginning now of this abduction period in which hypnotic regression is now used once again by the UFO investigators. And what they discover now is something that looks a whole lot like satanic ritual abuse and sexual abuse, but now it's being performed not by preschool teachers, but rather by aliens. Well, let me mention that when I first shared my theory with some of the research colleagues of John Mack, they didn't like it. Here's a passage by John Furr in a recent MUFON journal. There can be false memories that arise during hypnosis. False memories. Meet Kathleen Marden, niece of Betty and Barney Hill. a leading UFO researcher. Here are a couple of her reflections. Abduction experiencers consistently report being transported through solid surfaces, telepathic communication, light orbs that expand into non-human entities, poltergeist activity, and new psychic abilities, things that J. Allen Hynek might have said exhibit high strangeness. Now let me make a generalization of my own. I have been following the stream of UFO research that focuses on the scientific mindset when investigating unidentified aerial phenomena. I recognize there are other streams. There are streams that include reports of the paranormal. There are other streams that embrace New Age spirituality. I've elected to just stay in this one stream, but I'm very aware and not actually unsympathetic to reports of the paranormal. That's just not my shtick. Kathleen continues, many of us are not inclined to investigate reports of events that seem more like imagination than reality. MUFON is a scientifically oriented UFO investigating group that does not investigate these phenomena. Well, I have a kind of affinity or identity with Kathleen on this particular point. Meet Alejandro Rojas, Master of Ceremonies of the Extravaganza, the International UFO Congress, an annual gathering these days in Arizona in the spring. These various streams of the scientific approach to UFOs, the paranormal, the spiritual, they all flow together very nicely at the International UFO Congress. Let me return briefly to the ETI myth. Earlier, I made the point that the myth in general structure is one shared both by the scientifically minded ufologists as well as many of our space scientists, even astrobiologists. And let me try to demonstrate just how that works. Whom are we talking about? We're talking about our good friends at NASA or SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, and places like that. We can distinguish passive SETI from active SETI. The SETI Institute engages in passive SETI, that is to say, it simply listens for signals that might be coming our way. Active SETI sends signals from Earth to targeted regions within the Milky Way. Douglas Vakoch, formerly of SETI, is now directing METI, Messaging ETI International. Before he died, famed physicist Stephen Hawking warned against METI. Do not send signals from Earth directed towards extraterrestrial civilizations. Well, why not? Because, speculated Hawking, those extraterrestrial civilizations could be hostile. If they discover what a treasure Earth is, they may send their armies to conquer, exploit, and subjugate, just as Europeans sent their armies to the Americas to conquer, exploit, and subjugate. Hawking was projecting his experience with human nature on Earth to intelligent creatures in off-Earth civilizations. Do not send messages. We should electronically hide, argued Hawking. Well, Douglas Vakoch disagreed with Hawking. He has two basic arguments. Number one is the cat is out of the bag. Earth has already been accidentally issuing radio signals for a number of years, and it's possible that some ETI have already been listening to I Love Lucy television shows for 3/4 of a century. So we might as well issue a well-formulated message of invitation to communicate. In addition to that, we could very well meet an extraterrestrial civilization that's nice, not nasty. How will we know if we don't introduce ourselves? Here is Chris Impey, one of the nation's leading astrobiologists at the University of Arizona. Note his assumptions. Since we on Earth, since we've only just attained the capability for space travel and communication, any civilization we encounter is likely to be, what? Far more advanced than we are. It's the assumption that cosmic evolution over time leads to life, life leads to intelligence, and intelligence leads to science and technology. The Fermi paradox, succinctly stated in the short question, where are they? Imagine 1950, New York City. Trash barrels turn up missing. Where did they go? Who's taking them? Well, some start speculating that aliens emerging from landed flying saucers are stealing the trash barrels. Now, let's go to Los Alamos. Enrico Fermi is having lunch. And somebody shows him this cartoon from the New Yorker magazine of space aliens stealing trash barrels. Fermi, the physicist, starts thinking, He gets out pencil and paper and doing some rough calculations, the age of the universe, the number of stars in the Milky Way, the number of years for planets to develop, life to evolve, etc., and says, by these calculations, the Milky Way should be filled with traffic of spacecrafts from advanced civilizations. But they're not there. Where are they? Is there something wrong with our set of assumptions, I wonder? Frank Drake, along with Carl Sagan, launched the SETI project, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, by listening for radio signals. If there are advanced civilizations elsewhere in the Milky Way, then we could expect that they would be sending radio signals and we are going to listen. Passive SETI, waiting to hear a signal. Well, what should we expect expect in the way of the number of communicating civilizations. Frank Drake gave us his equation in 1961, where we start out with the number of civilizations in the Milky Way, well, at least those electromagnetically detectable. Then R, that's an addition to the original Drake equation, the rate of formation of stars suitable for the development of intelligent life. Then FP, the fraction of those stars with planetary systems. And E, the number of planets per solar system with an environment suitable for life. F lowercase l, the fraction of suitable planets on which life actually appears. Then Fi, the fraction of life-bearing planets on which intelligent life emerges. Fc, the fraction of civilizations that develop a technology that produces detectable signs of their existence. Then L, the average length of time such civilizations produce such signs in years. Both Drake and Sagan, working out of the ETI myth, assume that if evolution led to intelligence, intelligence to technology, that technology would lead to the invention of the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb, and then they could have a thermonuclear war, wipe themselves off the face of their home planet, disappear, and we would never even know about them. Or suppose when they faced the threat of nuclear war, they found their way through it. They made peace. They put away their weapons. They took a quantum leap in morality. So scientific and technological advance imply an advance in morality. We can expect a communicating civilization to be more advanced, not just in technology, but in morality. So finally, N then is the number of communicating civilizations. What would happen then if we on Earth were to communicate with an off-Earth civilization more highly advanced, not only in science and technology, but also in morality? What would happen? Well, let's go to the next slide. Here's an interview with Diane Richards. Frank says, everything we know says there are other civilizations out there to be found. A reminder, there is no empirical evidence whatsoever. However, statistically, we can be optimistic. The discovery of such civilizations would enrich our civilization with valuable information about science, technology, and a third, sociology. This information could directly improve our abilities to conserve and to deal with sociological problems, poverty, for example. Cheap energy is another potential benefit of discovery, as are advances in medicine. Now, he's talking off the cuff, but note how quickly contact with an extraterrestrial civilization would reap benefits beyond science and technology. We could cure poverty. Cheap energy, we could cure the ecological crisis. Medicine, oh my gosh, we could improve human health. The ETI myth. Science saves on Earth, and a more advanced extraterrestrial science coming from the heavens will even be better at saving us from self-destruction. Just as an aside, Frank has really invested himself in the work of SETI over the last 6 decades, and the whole world applauds him for his advancement of the cause of science. Frank and I were having a cup of coffee together at the Royal Society in London. I think it might have been 2010, casual. I said, Frank, I remember in the 1960s and maybe even in the 1970s, you were very interested in the UFO phenomenon and the extraterrestrial hypothesis. What do you think now? Oh, he says, I really was interested for a period of time, but I kind of gave it up. He said, research didn't really seem to be going anywhere, so I'm no longer interested in UFOs. What is my evaluation? I genuinely hope that every one of Frank Drake's dreams comes true. I hope we make contact with a more advanced extraterrestrial civilization. And I hope that our planetary society here on Earth benefits in all the ways that Frank dreams about. I have to point out, however, that this is mythological thinking. There is no empirical evidence to support this hope. It's not scientific, it's pre-scientific. It belongs to a mythological structure that requires demythologizing and interpreting, and it may make the mistake of asking more of science and technology than science and technology can actually deliver indirectly. Science and technology are thought of as the saviors of humankind on Earth. And I suggest we engage in some demythologizing just to get clear as to what's going on. And this isn't a criticism of Frank Drake or the vision of SETI. No, I'm just trying to understand the religious elements that are bleeding through the science. Let's return for a few minutes to the ancient world, the Greco-Roman world, although you can find something similar going on in ancient India. It's the Gnostic Redeemer myth. According to the Gnostic Redeemer myth, the human problem is that we live in darkness, we live in ignorance, and so salvation is accomplished through knowledge, through ascending from the darkness into the realm of the light. The darkness that we live in is physicality. The physical world is constantly cluttering our mind with feelings, feelings prompted by the senses that are interacting with the physical world. The true light that gives us enlightenment is disembodied. It transcends the body. Our objective is to leave the darkness of the body to ascend the 7 heavens towards the divine light. And the divine in this case is not a personal God. No, it's the oversoul. It is, as Plotinus, the philosopher, would say, the one light that transcends the personalness of a personal God. So there exists, according to the Gnostic Redeemer myth, within you and me a divine spark called the pneuma. It comes into theological language as spirit. Each one of us has a pneuma, but this spark has been smothered by the darkness of physicality. So from the realm of light, there descends the Gnostic Redeemer, the revealer, the teacher. And if we pay attention to what we get taught, we fan the flames of that spark, and that spark naturally wants to rise. Try to imagine a campfire with the sparks rising up into heaven. So also the spark, divine spark within you and me, wants to rise up through the seven heavens until it returns to its home with the divine oneness that unifies all things. There's a little bit of this in the New Testament. Jesus is the Gnostic Redeemer. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He's the great teacher. But by and large, the New Testament does not see the human problem as one of ignorance to be cured with knowledge. By and large, the New Testament sees the human problem as that of a will that chooses evil, and the divine cure for that is forgiveness, repentance, forgiveness, and renewal. But let's stick to the Gnostic Redeemer myth rather than the distinctively Christian doctrine of salvation. Okay, so we live in darkness. The Gnostic Redeemer comes, delivers knowledge which fans the flames of the divine spark from within. What happens when we get to the modern world? The world of reason in the 18th century, and the world of science that we live in today. Well, what has happened is that divine spark has been replaced by reason, and instead of the bright light of the divine, we now have the natural world, so that reason lying within us can be liberated through education so that we understand the cosmos within which we live. And salvation comes to us through this knowledge of the cosmos. So it all depends on how you describe the human problem. Is the human condition described mainly as one of ignorance, for which either a spiritual teacher will lead us to the light, or reason through science will lead us to the light? How do you define the human predicament from which we need redemption? Let's tease out briefly the horizontal Gnostic myth, the myth of the New Age. According to philosopher Eric Berglund, it has a three-stage structure: paradise, fall from paradise, New Age paradise. In the modern West, it goes like this. Ancient Athens was the original realm of light and the great philosophers of Plato and Aristotle. The Middle Ages constitutes the fall into religion. The modern age, enlightenment, liberates us from religion and puts us on the doorstep, on the threshold to the fulfillment of all human desires. And the Gnostic Redeemer, science and technology. That's the underlying mythological religious structure embedded within culture that provides the energy and direction for progress in science and technology. Tell me a myth and put me in it. One of the curious characteristics of myth telling is that the myth teller gets to feel really important. So within that three-stage Gnostic myth we just looked at, there are sub-myths. One is the three revolutions, the revolutions that extirpated Western civilization from the darkness of the Dark Ages when religion had captivated and smothered the human spirit. Here they are. The Copernican revolution, where Earth is no longer the center, followed by the Darwinian revolution, where the human being is no longer special, and then the Freudian revolution, where the ego is no longer the master of the psyche. The three great revolutions that liberate us from the darkness of medieval religion. Well, who tells this myth? Sigmund Freud. And he wants to diminish the human ego? Meet Jill Tarter, fine scientist, longtime director of research at SETI in the tradition of Carl Sagan. She would like to move religion out of its place in civilization and substitute science. Science should take the place of religion. So as she develops her model for understanding extraterrestrial life. Now, just remember, there's nothing here to do with UFOs. It has to do with an astrobiologist speculating about life on other planets. She says ETIs, or the robotic emissaries, will be far older than we, have had a longer time to evolve than we are. Look at the role of the science of evolution in her thinking, a longer time to evolve, more highly advanced technologically, maybe more morally advanced. What about the concept of the fall? She doesn't use that language, but look what she implies. The extraterrestrial longevity is inconsistent with organized monotheistic religions on Earth. Such religions are responsible for the longest lasting warfare and destruction. On Earth, we have a fall into religion, and religion is what is the cause of evil on Earth. And so, if ET has evolved more fully for a longer period of time, it didn't self destruct. So, religion didn't cripple extraterrestrial civilization. So now she looks forward to what we would call the millennium, right? The post apocalypse period of peace, in which Dr. Tarter speculates there will be no sex, no religious sex, that is. There will be only a highly established code of ethics. Her doctrine of salvation, this is science's savior salvation, is that the ETs, when they communicate with us, may tell us how it is possible to transition from the my God versus your God conflicts to a more stable universal religion, a religion of understanding. So basically, according to Dr. Tarter, science will save us, and a more advanced extraterrestrial science has a better chance of saving us from the fall into religion. John Traffigan at the University of Texas at Austin thinks somewhat Similarly to my analysis here, he doesn't use the word myth, he uses social imaginary, but I think he means roughly the same thing. He compares SETI with Star Trek, strongly suggests that Star Trek has an influence over SETI's self-understanding. The outcome of SETI is knowledge, so there's the Gnostic structure. The outcome of SETI is knowledge that has the potential to offer salvation to a civilization that's us on Earth, to a civilization in distress, by offering the potential of learning from superior beings who have actually achieved utopia. In short, the habituated practice of justification and legitimization in which SETI scientists engage is grounded in the social imaginary, that's where you would use the word ETI myth, juxtaposed against the social reality those scientists observe around them. A reality, that's our reality here on Earth, a reality of conflict and imminent danger associated with the trials and tribulations of civilizational adolescence. Adolescence is given us by Carl Sagan. Our nuclear age is the adolescence period of the human race on Earth. Will we grow up or destroy ourselves before we get to utopia? Trafficking goes on, and this particular social imaginary draws on or shares, I'm going to say shares, not draws on, key themes found within the Star Trek universe that organize cultural change around the imaginings of a future directed toward the moral and physical salvation associated with an evolutionary eschatology. So I agree with everything he's saying here, except I don't think Star Trek causes the evolutionary utopianism of SETI. Rather, I think they both share the larger Enlightenment Gnostic ideal that science and technology have liberated us from humanity's fall into religion, and therefore more science and more technology will lead to utopia. And if SETI accomplishes its mission, that utopia will come to Earth from the heavens. This is a myth or social imaginary that is shared by both the ufologists and the SETI astrobiologists. Let me try on for size a few spiritual speculations about the UFO phenomenon. And remember, I defined a phenomenon as an experience in which both the object perceived and the interpretations of the perceiver are taken as a single package. And so I don't deny the objectivity of the UFO stimulus. Are people actually seeing things, and are people actually experiencing things? I will grant that an objectivity is present, but I'm really interested in the overlays of interpretive structures in that experience. And the UFOs twang our spiritual strings, I've suggested, with transcendence, omniscience, perfection, and redemption. Transcendence, just the association of the flying saucer with outer space, because space is one of those physical dimensions of your and my sensibilities that connotes the beyond, that which transcends Earth and transcends through our imaginations everything that we think of as finite. Omniscience. We don't know how to fly from here to another planet, but if they know how to fly from their planet to ours, they must be smarter than us. Do they know everything? Or could their superior knowledge save us from ignorance? Perfection. Well, Carl Jung thought the round shape of the flying saucer symbolized perfection. Circles are symbols of perfection, but we're getting a lot of reports of triangular shape UFOs and different shapes. I think we have to look for perfection a little bit more subtly. Remember the Dick Jackson case, the aliens spoke perfect English. The visiting UFOnauts are certainly superior to us in many regards, and maybe that superiority hints at perfection, even if it doesn't embrace it fully. Finally, redemption. This is the biggie. We see it especially in the celestial savior model. The advanced science and technology of another planet comes to Earth and saves us either from self-destruction through nuclear war or from self-destruction due to the environmental crisis, the anthropogenic component to the environmental crisis. The theologian's going to point out that those exoplanets, those civilizations where our brothers and sisters in space are currently living, still belong to God's creation. Theologically, they can't be God. Oh, they could be emissaries from God. They could be God's chariots, but not God. Genuine transcendence takes us beyond even the cosmos. God is the creator of all things. Heaven, salvation, no, don't confuse another planet made up of rocks and oxygen with heaven. Aliens are not angels. Could they be emissaries or messengers from God? Yeah, I think so. But don't think of aliens as technological angels. The message we get frequently from the aliens speaking to the contactees is a pretty good message, isn't it? The aliens tell we earthlings, or us earthlings, to love one another, to strive for world peace, to dig deep within our souls. I think that's a pretty good message, and if visitors from outer space give us that message and it turns out to be the same message that we gain from the Bible and from other great wise souls in the world's religions, I think it's a message well worth listening to. Finally, what have we been up to in this ride where I asked you to fasten your seatbelts and shortly you can unfasten them? Science belongs to culture, and culture bears with it our religious sensibilities. The idea that somehow or other religion is a form of superstition that smothers the human mind in darkness and ignorance is way too simplistic, because those religious sensibilities are pressing through, and what we have in science today is frankly a secular form of religion. All of those religious pressures and dynamisms are still at work. So the secular language of science may look like a bandage on your arm, but that bandage gets redder and redder because our religious sensibilities are bleeding through. And one of the characteristics of the ETI myth is that those who believe in the myth fail to understand that they're believing in a myth, not science. That's not exactly a criticism, it's just an attempt to understand how culture, science, and the UFO phenomenon work. And that's why a theologian earns an honest living in trying to help us understand all these things. November 26, 1977, the South England Television Network, about 5 o'clock p.m., the regular programming was interrupted, and a strange voice declared to all who were tuned in, "This is the voice of Asteron." Asteron claimed to represent an intergalactic association that is deeply concerned about our welfare on Earth. Asteron went on to warn us that we have only a short time to live. To avoid total annihilation, we must put away our weapons of war. We must embrace one another. We must learn to live together in peace. After 6 minutes, the transmission ended. The TV station was bombarded by its frightened audience, and a mood of panic had gripped the viewers. Officials at the network set about an investigation, and the following Tuesday I heard a news broadcaster reporting the public statement of one of the South England Television Network spokespersons. Asteron's message that we should put down our weapons of war and strive for world peace, he said, was the result of a hoax. And then the spokesman guaranteed that that message would not be heard again on that station. That message would not be heard again on that station. Isn't that sad? Regardless of the source, terrestrial or extraterrestrial, it's a wonderful message. We've come to the end of our journey. You can unfasten that seatbelt. You successfully held steady through all the curves and jerks and ups and downs of this ride. I hope you found it as fascinating as I did. Should you like any additional materials on the creative mutual interaction of science and religion, just go to my website there, tedstimelytake.com. In the meantime, bye-bye.